Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the new social environment. I'll go ahead and jump in. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 579th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Sagaman, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Estrellita Brodsky, Julio Cruz-Diez, José Falconi, Ruben Ortiz-Torres, and their host, Lyle Rexer. We're thrilled to welcome poet Angela Vasquez here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. Today's conversation will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you can view the full archive of this series. You'll now see the acknowledgement and daily link in the chat. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guests and host. Dr. Estrellita B. Brodsky is a New York-based curator, collector, and philanthropist who is well known for her support of Latin American art and artists. Brodsky is the founder of Another Space, a program that aims to broaden international awareness and appreciation of art from Latin America and its diaspora. As a philanthropist, she has endowed curatorial positions in this field at Tate, MoMA, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Artist Julio Cruz-Diez is known for his figurative black and white graphite and charcoal drawings that combine portraiture with references to popular culture and mythology. An American citizen with family on both sides of the border, he lives and works in San Diego, California, and Rosarito, Mexico. José Falconi is a Peruvian writer, curator, photographer, and editor living in Boston. Falcone is currently an assistant professor of art and human rights at the University of Connecticut. He received his PhD from Harvard University in 2010, and from 2001 to 2011, he was Art Forum curator at the David Rockefeller for Latin American Studies at Harvard University, where he curated more than 30 shows of cutting-edge Latino and Latin American artists. Ruben Ortiz-Torres is a multidisciplinary artist and curator born in Mexico City and based in California. His work explores multiculturalism, hybridity, and contemporary culture, and blends Latin American and American art and politics. Since 1982, Ortiz-Torres' work has been featured in 25 solo exhibitions, over 100 group shows around the world. And our host today, Lyle Rexer, is an independent critic, curator, and writer, and the author of multiple notable publications on the medium of photography. His essays on art, architecture, and photography have been featured in publications such as The Rail, the New York Times, Harper's, Art in America, among others. He's lectured at many institutions, and he teaches in both the graduate and undergraduate programs at SPA. And with that, Lyle, welcome, and let's jump in.
Great. Thank you, Chloe. I want to just open up a little bit with saying the thing that I always say whenever I work with the Rail team. They're just a wonderful group. I want to thank Chloe and Nick and Raven and everybody else who's worked to make this series happen. It's an incredible resource. It's a great series. And every time I have a chance to be part of it, it's always a thrill. It's a really terrific lineup. I'm so happy to be here with these terrific artists, Ruben and Hugo, and people who I admire a great deal. Estrellita, who's been one of the most important people in the establishment of Latin American and let's call it, you can call it Latinx, call it whatever you want, art in New York City and in the United States. She's just been an incredibly important person in the recognition of that work. And I know that's been a long pull. And José Falconi, who's also a great poet, a great writer, a critic, and a terrific photographer. So it's a really, really exciting group. I'm glad we're all here. The other thing I want to say is that the exhibition around which we're sort of discussing today, which is our proximate cause for being here, at Another Space, which is the space that Estrellita and her husband Dan Brodsky have organized in Manhattan, is a wonderful show. It's not going to be up for that much longer. If you have a chance to make contact and to come down and see the work in situ, we're going to see some pictures of it today, obviously. It's really fantastic, and I urge people to do what they can to come see the work in the flesh. It's an exhibition called Elsewheres, which is our immediate topic. I wonder, Chloe, if you could put up just our PowerPoint from the show, and we'll kind of take it from the top.
Yes.
This is the space. I'm not going to do a lot of narrating about this, but we have kind of in order, and I think Chloe can just scroll through. I have a couple of questions to set things going. My question is kind of an obvious one for the two curators. Jose and Estrellita work together on the show. I'd very much like to know how it came together. And also I'd like to talk a little bit about this topic, which is a very interesting one to me, called Elsewheres, with a little with the plural in parentheses. And so either one of you, Estrellita or Jose, I wonder if you can give us a little background about how all this developed.
Esti, go ahead.
Well, I think we were invited by Untitled to do a curated section, and having known Jose for 20 years, we thought it'd be great fun. And it really did give us an opportunity to think about what kind of topics we could imagine would be of interest to reconfigure the dialogue about artists from Latin America and its diaspora, and to really think of the ways in which artists have expanded the limits of our perceived reality, their alternative paths or newly imagined or rediscovered territories. From my perspective, it was kind of going back to something like Les Magiciens de la Terre, which was highly criticized because it exoticized the Latin American. But on the other hand, there is these recurrent themes, no? And Jose, if you want to talk about that and how we organize that.
Well, yes. Thank you. First of all, thank you, everyone, for being here,
Yes.
and especially for the rail, Chloe, Nick, and Raven, and really grateful for the opportunity, and Lyle, of course, for you being here. We're really grateful. Quickly about it. Yes, I mean, when the invitation from Untitled, the art fair, from our good friend Omar, came, we said that we haven't worked like in 10 years, but we said like, well, why don't we do it again? And let's do it. So we did, and we had a lot of fun. And one of the things that, remember, we were in the middle of the pandemic, at that time when the invitation came in. And again, the question about the function of what was the function of the artists, what they were doing, in which ways did they really, quote unquote, contribute, to society, was one of the nagging questions, I think, that, everywhere people were asking. And so we thought of opening that question. Using that particular question, we tried to, create a narrative about precisely what you were saying, Lyle. I mean, the notion of elsewhere. Where are the places, that, where does art takes us? It opens up new spaces. It usually is, at the avant-garde, quote unquote, of society, in order to opening up new spaces, in order to, try to show us particular possible different paths of in which society could go. And therefore, obviously it's a constructor of utopias. I mean, some of them, most of them probably still remaining simply as utopias, but also of of many issues. I mean, many aspects of fantasies, of ways in which, you could step out of your daily life and also be enriched by it. Now, in the Americas, and this is one of the caveats that we have here, in the Americas, you just not need to only imagine worlds. You just simply need to go out. There are so many different worlds concomitant and living together at the same time, that was also part of our work. The elsewhere is always living with us. It's just a matter of just simply tuning into it, to the many elsewheres that are actually, in real time, coexistent. So that's basically what the show is about. And that's why we have a number of artists you know, who work on starting from, you know, stargazers looking at, you know,
Right.
at the space to, you know, Shul Solar, you know, people who have been thinking about, like, you know, other worlds. And again, you know, and tongue-in-cheek artists such as, like, you know, Adal Maldonado, you know, who has this wonderful work that Ines and I really love, which is called Coconuts in Space, in which, you know, here you have, like, you know, the Americans going up to the moon, and all the time they found Puerto Ricans there. And then they're like, oh my goodness, Houston, we have a problem, you know. Clearly they have a problem because of, I mean, there are Puerto Ricans there, you know, in the space, you know. So again,
and artists who've gone back to these contested geographies and kind of redefined whose territories are being defined by whom.
Right.
And that part.
Right. As I was walking through the show, I started counting up all the different sorts of elsewheres that we were getting. And, you know, as you said, there's utopias, there's false utopias, there's colonized spaces that are imagined as other. And we've got some, in a sense, some commentary on that. We've got actual other spaces that actually, I mean, real elsewheres that Jose was talking about, which are, you know, very different ways of thinking about the world, of being in the world, sort of indigenous ways of thinking about it. But there's also sort of transformation of the present through, you know, basically through works of art, which is what interests me most, that the idea that there is a kind of imaginative elsewhere that we see the artists kind of working through constantly and bringing together kind of different material elements in order to make that happen. Sometimes it's ironic, sometimes it's critical. There's obviously a lot of different attitudes toward this. I was very interested in well, I have a couple of questions about some of the selections you made, and maybe, but before I go to that, I'm very interested in how both of the artists that we have here, Ruben and Hugo, you have really important work in this show, and I'm just wondering about your take on this, because that whole idea of elsewhere can be very problematic in the sense that it kind of plays into certain kind of exotic stereotypes about what art from Latin America or the diaspora can be about. So I wonder how you, both you artists, both of you, Hugo and Ruben, how you kind of, what your take on this, or how did you feel about kind of the, how should we say, this unruly company that you're in?
We're not that unruly.
They're the most unruly of all of them.
Yes, exactly.
Especially
The other ones
Ruben.
were pretty.
Ruben, you want to go first, or should I? Well, my take is just, I was very honored to be part of this exhibition and to be with this very eclectic group of artists. One of the things that always strikes me about the work that I saw in the exhibition was the sense of humor, the wonderful sense of humor that's always present in all of the work, the majority of the work. This idea of, with the most little of resources, we can soar to the sky, you know, we can fly to space. You know? This idea of, even today, where they're talking about how, you know, usually a country like the United States with all the resources, they tend to, the idea of creativity is to think outside of the box. But in Latin America, we think inside the box, you know, with the limitations of where we come from. No, lack of resources, lack of help from institutions. So then, but even from there, is that despite of all this, we can still dream about flying into space and dream about science fiction and utopias.
Take out your mute, Ruben. You're mute. You're muted.
Okay, responding to the question of how this kind of how this work is exoticized or somehow seems to be portraying that the title elsewhere could lead to this kind of I guess either exoticizing or differentiation, or I don't know. This it seems to me that the way the question was asked that was also well, referring to the fact that this can be presented as this otherness, right? This question, obviously, I mean, it's in the case of the work that I'm presenting, those images that I took come from a series of images where I realized that as I came to the United States and I was working in California, I was in CalArts, California Institute of the Arts, that there was particular attention to images that I would present in photography, as opposed to other work that I was doing, like that I was doing, for example, that I was doing in painting or whatever, or using other media, because photography was perceived to, again, was seen as this index of reality, right? That there was a certain kind of objectivity in what I was doing, and that the other work that I was presenting was subjective, right? That if I would present images, I don't know, if I would present a sculpture, a painting, or an installation, that was my point of view, which they were not so interested in as they were into looking at how would Latin America would be, and especially if it would be presented by myself, because I would be perceived as an objective witness to that, right? Like somebody that would know what I was representing. Paradoxically, because I was here, when I would go there, I would pay attention not so much to the constructions of what Latin America was, but actually of the distortions that I would see in Latin America of the United States, right? Or of again, what would, I guess, this misused word, American culture, right? America, I mean, of course, America, there is not even in perceived America. So in a way, I also realized that here the same happened, because here I was paying a lot of attention to these distortions of what my understanding of Latin America was. So as a result, I ended up with a lot of images, like, for example, the images that we are seeing on the screen, this particular one, for example, well, is this really a representation of Latin America, or is it a representation of Latin America or the United States? And this particular series, turns out that within this body of work, there were a lot of images that related to science fiction, right? But the point is that this otherness, like, I mean, in a way, there's this artificial construction, because this is not, again, I was looking at how they would look at us, or looking at them, whatever that means. At this point, I don't even know what is us and them. But here I would see the distortions of how, I don't know, if I would go, like what a giant sombrero would do in the middle of the street, or, in South Carolina. Yeah. Or then I would go back to Mexico, and then I would see these things, right? Like, you would see, like, what the hell? Why the hell in a furniture store there's people dressed like a Star Wars, like Artudito? So I would take these images, and these images, believe it or not, are straight documentary. I mean, I didn't stage any of these. These are things that I would find, and so to that question is, I think that that exotization it probably is there, but it's not in the ways that you expect. Because exotization perhaps is not so much of how Latin America is looking here, but how we are looking ourselves reflect. I mean, again, ourselves, but how the United States sees itself reflected through there. So there's a mutual game of distortions and misinterpretations.
I wanted to, actually, I was thinking about La Raza Cósmica. I wanted to read this quote from Vasconcelos. It's in Spanish: una raza mestiza, una mezcla de razas afines, una raza de color, la primera raza síntesis del globo. And it's a description of this kind of, Vasconcelos' kind of cosmic idea that ultimately we would all be kind of one future race. And I know that you were referencing that fairly directly in this Raza Cósmica. And I wondered if you want to just comment on that. I love this picture, by the way.
Well, this picture is actually particularly funny, and I like, there's a personal story here, because this is a collection of toys of these artists, this Chicano artist, Mario Ibarra. And so we were goofing one day on the street, and I took this image. But yes, I mean, Vasconcelos, who, by the way, has been widely criticized, and often, I mean, he had this strange nationalist idea. I always was intrigued about this idea. I kind of, I've been fascinated by this argument that if you mix everything, you get a Mexican, right? No matter what. You could, somebody from Norway and a Chinese, somebody from Congo, you're going to end up with a Mexican, right? Which in a way, again, just reveals how absurd constructions of nationality are, right?
And race,
and race, of course. but I like that idea because in a way that I see myself reflected in every combination of any kind. After that, and poor people, they would have to see myself reflected in them, I guess.
But this, I want to go back and you maybe you also, but I want to go back to this idea of science fiction again, because obviously that it comes up in the show a lot. We can see we've got some science fiction activity going on in our in our backgrounds here. I mean, you're in a space capsule, and Jose is with Chewbacca, and I'm super interested as somebody who grew up in this milieu in the 1950s, and I was so steeped in it. I don't think I ever believed it, but it just seemed like a kind of perfect way to think about all kinds of stuff when I was a kid. And I'm also interested, I mean, I'm very interested in the way Hugo uses it, because both of you have really quite interesting takes on this as a kind of as a lens for looking at the cross-border stuff, and especially this idea that there's a certain kind of culture coming out of the United States that travels everywhere. And it looks like this. It looks like aliens. It looks like ET. It looks like so many of these things that were started to be generated in the 1950s right through the 2000s. So, and there's a couple of other images that come up in Hugo's work. I wonder, Hugo, if you would talk a little bit about your interest in science fiction, and especially if we go to our robot picture in the show, which I think is a really important starting place. That one.
Well, yes, I'm a child of the 70s. You know, I grew up in the 70s, and you know, the movie Star Wars just made an incredible impression on me, especially because you know I was able to cross the border into the United States to see the movie when it came out. Usually, movies would take about 6 months to get to Tijuana, which is basically the furthest point from Mexico City. You know, so we're like at the farthest point in the universe. But I saw that movie, and it just completely, I remember as a kid, it was like this major point in my life, seeing Star Wars. And then seeing the kind of the similarities of it, or at least pretending to have the similarities of Star Wars and my life itself. The main character, Luke Skywalker, lives in Tatooine, which is, he explains it as the farthest point of the universe. But all of the action and the hero rises from that point. And here I was in Tijuana, also the farthest point from el ombligo de la luna, from the navel of Mexico, the center of Mexico, where everything always comes. And Tijuana was precisely the farthest point. We might as well be in space. So then that movie really made a huge impact on me, and just about dreaming about science fiction. And in this particular piece, Robotlique, that was just a drawing that I started thinking about precisely this idea of my identity, which is basically focused here on the border, with more influence in the United States than in Mexico, because I even don't remember learning English. I just grew up with this language, so then I was bilingual since the beginning. And to me, the mixing of these two characters, Coatlicue, which is the Aztec god, the Aztec mother goddess, and Robbie the Robot, which is a character from the movie Forbidden Planet.
Forbidden Planet, right, exactly.
1956. And what I loved about that movie in particular was that was the first American attempt to make a serious science fiction movie. Before that, there was the serials of Flash Gordon and this kind of idea of, the space Western or the space, adventure. But Forbidden Planet was this attempt to bring Shakespeare to science fiction. It was loosely based on The Tempest by William Shakespeare. And the character of Robbie the Robot, it was portrayed in the posters as this menacing figure, this idea of this huge robot carrying the girl, and it was like, people thought that the robot was going to be the antagonist. But of course not. In the movie, the robot plays the character of Ariel. And it has a very domestic element to it. It takes care of the planet. It takes care of the technology. It takes care of the people, and it actually follows those rules that robots have, that they cannot harm human beings. So then it's this benevolent presence that's there. And then also, the mixture of Robbie the Robot with Coatlicue, which is the mother goddess, which also in a way she gave birth to Huitzilopochtli, the main Aztec god of war and symbol of Mexico. but gave birth to him in a very science fiction kind of way, in a very fantastic way. It was this ball of feathers that dropped on her and she gave birth. And she gave birth as she was sweeping a temple, this domestic activity of the mother, cleaning something, and taking care of something, So then to me, this image of Robotlique and Coatlicue is this very benevolent, it has this threatening image. Coatlicue itself is a very scary image. The Aztecs, when they saw it, they thought it was satanic. But here it's this huge, horrible creature that's actually benevolent and very domestic and taking care of the children. And in this case, he's taking care of, these children that have all these ethereal images of science fiction. So then that juxtaposition of these two elements that sometimes can be misinterpreted. People see something that's very threatening, but in this case, Robotlique, Coatlicue, and Robbie the Robot are these benevolent figures that might be misunderstood. So
yeah, very much.
Yeah,
very much so. And what intrigued me about this and about your work more broadly is that there's a fairly consistent working out of a series of motifs or a series of kind of new icons that I absolutely love and I think is really important. Maybe we should talk about that a little bit. Certain kinds of ideas or certain kinds of gestures that you make come up over and over again. Like, for example, this is a perfect example in the series Tijuana Radiant Shine.
Yeah.
You have certain kinds of images come up that they also come up in some of your other series. I wonder if you talk about some of the iconography that you're working out here. I love the idea of the space helmet as well as a kind of protective thing. It's usually associated in the work very often with women or children. And if you could talk about some of the other imagery that you're working through, some of the Aztec gods show up in this in ways that are really quite disturbing. Maybe we should talk about some of these images a little bit.
Sure. Well, this particular series, the Tijuana Radiant Shine, it was this whole series that was me playing with this idea of Tijuana futurism, like this idea of Tijuana being one of the youngest cities in Mexico, not as old as Guadalajara or Mexico City, which are hundreds of years old. Mexico City Tijuana is, I think it's about 125 years old. So a very young city, and this notion of something that's very young tends to look more towards the future than towards the past. So then playing with this idea of Tijuana futurism, where there's robots and it's this element of, another major movie that influenced me when I was a kid was Blade Runner, which was one of those first movies that showed this extreme urbanism that was the mixture of old and the new, but mostly old. It looked kind of decrepit, and in a way, Tijuana has this also aesthetic, of something that's kind of improvised and not really well planned, and so then I with this series of Tijuana Radiant Shine, I wanted to play with this notion of the rides that you see in carnavales, in carnavales, which they look like they're very unsafe, but it has these notions of rockets and things that go very fast, So then here, for example, with this image of Gene Tacos, it's a taco stand that has genetically designed tacos, So then this mixture of all the traditional of the taco, which I love, but then also this Blade Runner kind of element, where we're splicing genes to make tacos, and this absurd notion of the Gene Tacos, or even with the last image where the girl with the robot, that one, like it has kind of like this composition of the Annunciation, like this very Catholic image of an angel giving a message to a young woman, this virgin. But in this case, the angel is this very horrifying element of this figure with robot hands and looks very threatening, very much like Coatlicue, like Robotlique. And then she's holding her phone, documenting the Annunciation, and she's giving thanks, that there's enough Wi-Fi here for me to document this, because people are not going to believe that I'm witnessing an angel. So then these absurd elements, even today here in Tijuana, we're looking for the Wi-Fi. I see people like going like this. So then it's this fantastic element that I try to portray in a very funny way, but then also it has these elements that look serious and kind of look threatening. This image, for example, referencing this idea of urbanization, like Blade Runner. But then this very futuristic landscape, but then you have the old two men drinking their beers in the liquor store, which in Tijuana, at every corner, there's a liquor store or a pharmacy, So then here's the very idiosyncrasies of the city of Tijuana, but portrayed in this very futuristic and Blade Runner and urban kind of environment.
Yeah, it actually brings up for me, and you guys should jump in whenever you want, because there's just so much to ask you about this. But just to shift gears for a minute, that whole idea of incongruity as a strategy, and I mean, in your work, it's a little bit different since you're working through drawing as a process, and that's actually, and maybe collage elements. It's a little bit different, but it really jumps out for me in Ruben's work, and things coming together, or being deliberately brought together or recontextualized, you can call it whatever you want, where it really does create this kind of shock. And one of the examples that is really sort of top of mind for me was an exhibition or installation that you did, that Ruben did, called Plata o Plomo o Glitter. Lead, or money, or glitter. And Plata o Plomo was that famous phrase from Pablo Escobar, the drug kingpin, which was basically his offer to every official he ever met with, which is, I can either pay you or I can shoot you. And then the third element, which is glitter. And we have in this installation, of this picture that I pulled off the internet, we've got pieces from, I think that they were Border Patrol vehicles, as I understood it, that have been, let's say, repurposed from junkyards. And they have some really unusual features. Ruben, I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about the things that you brought together in this, let's say, in this approach, or this installation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those parts, yeah, they have a history of their own. Those parts, actually, they come from Tijuana police patrols. They weren't border patrol cars. They actually were Tijuana patrols, and they were Tijuana patrols that were shot or burned by the cartels. Somehow I was buying parts of cars to make these sculptures and doing these things, and I ended up landing in this junkyard in Tijuana. And then there were these parts and that had this history, and so I was trying to figure out how to interact with them. At the time, I was working, as you pointed out, yes, with silver. I had made pieces with silver and lead, because also, on top of the symbolic meaning that you mentioned, they are interesting materials that are very versatile. I mean, lead melts, and it's very malleable. And then silver, gold as well. I mean, silver leaf, it's also used in customizing. And of course, I've also been working with all these custom paint, like with urethanes and car paint that customizes use, mostly lowriders here in Southern California. And then turns out that lowriders, we use a lot of metal flake, right?
Right.
Metal flake, shiny, sparkling, very gaudy material, which has these other connotations, right? I mean, it's often perceived as very feminine. And then this turns out that in Latin America, as we were having, I mean, it was very complicated these last New Year's, as you guys know, because as we were dealing with police brutality in the United States against mostly African American people, there were also these incidents and these major protests in Latin America against police brutality. But in the case of Latin America, police brutality was being directed against women. So it hit me. I mean, this abuse of power, right, of the police and these institutions of power, how they would abuse vulnerable segments of the population. And in the case of Latin America, it happened to be women. So women protesting started throwing glitter at the cops. And they call that the glitter revolution, right? So it hits me that if Escobar's, we have these symbols of power, right? Money or weapons, right? Or gun, lead or silver. But we also, it seems to me that there's also this other symbol of this other kind of power, which is glitter, right? Which would be seduction, beauty, right? Which of course is the kind of power that we as artists, I guess I have some kind of access to, right? Like, you know, this power of seduction, this power of beauty, this power of, so learning from this woman, and also realizing that I work with glitter, that I've always worked with glitter, right? Even though, of course, my assistant Chava, the law writer, would say it's not glitter, it's metal flake, but it's the same, right? So
same difference, absolutely.
Same difference. So then I apply the metal flake on top of the, as you can see, for example, in the door on the back, but it's applied differently. I didn't spray it. I just threw it. I tested. I covered the police symbol with a glitter, and I have like my action painting, my action protest glitter street, action painting. Which, by the way, those materials, enamels at some point Jackson Pollock used that came from Siqueiros, right? Who was also painting with tar paints and experiment with acrylics and enamels, industrial material. Yeah, so there's a history there of these comment. They comment on art, but also they have these different layers.
Yeah, I'm curious about the reaction to that when you took these parts and kind of brought them together with that. Again, with that idea of glitter, which is funny and it's also very familiar. What was the reaction to that? Were people shocked by that? Did they think it was just a joke, or how did they take that? I don't know if you heard feedback.
I mean, the whole world, as you know, sort of closed and collapsed. But I was able to show this in Los Angeles before this happened. I haven't shown any of the work in Mexico or in Tijuana. I showed it in Los Angeles. And I was surprised. I'm very compelled by this very positive reaction, and having this. Most of the people that wrote about this were actually women, who I never. Usually there's always these, divisions, right? Like if I work with cars, cars is like it's supposed to be sale culture, and and guns, and this might be bad boy art, but it's not. I mean, it was written by taken very seriously by some woman, and yeah, I mean, I would like to see what kind of reaction I would get in other parts of the border. But here, it's also, there are precedents of which are one of the artists that worked with hoods before was Judy Chicago. She did these pieces. So all of a sudden, I saw myself having a dialogue, which I've always kind of have, because the pattern, decoration, baroqueness, these are things that often associated to these. I mean, again, these clashes between these languages, right? Minimalism and iconoclasm, and as opposed to this baroque and ornamentation and seduction. So, which in California, I think they always existed, right? I think if you look at fetish finish painting, but also Latin American modernism has those contradictions, right? It's often very seductive, and you participate. It's tactile. It's the synthesis is it has always this other side. It's not just this purist art form. It always has these contradictions and levels of complexity.
Well, you bring up the thing I like is that you brought up the B word, okay, which is the beauty part, and that whole idea of glitter and the surface and metal flake paint, and there was some. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that in this show, there's a really remarkable work by Ligia Pape. And I wanted to go back to Estrellita and Jose for just a second. And it's a work that, as I understand it, has never been shown before. It's got its own space in the exhibition. It's an incredibly, I don't know how to describe it, diaphanous, I guess maybe is not quite the right word. It's a work that almost disappears in front of you. And it's again, it's never been displayed before, as I understand it. I wonder if you, Estrellita and Jose, you can talk a little bit about the presence of that piece in the show. And I'm not sure, I think there's a picture of it in our lineup, but I can't remember for sure. Again, it's in a dark room.
Because, as you say, it appears and disappears, which makes it very hard to photograph.
Right.
And it was a work that she first did these tateas in the 1978, and she considered them weavings, which is another part of the exhibition, to really focus on practices and regions that have been ignored or dismissed by Western rationality. And that for us, we wanted to show this idea of weaving the knots, textiles as a form of communication that's very prevalent in certain indigenous societies, but also for these modernist artists who thought of it as a way of expanding the concept of creating spaces out of this textiles. And that's a work by Sandra Monterroso from Guatemala. If Jose wants to speak.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, that's a wonderful piece as well.
And the way to communicate through textiles.
Yeah.
But for people who were considered neo-concretists, such as Ligia Papa, she was very involved with the Amazonian indigenous people and was very interested in protecting their traditions. And so since even the 1950s, she was doing weavings called teclares, which is the word for weaving, but in 2 dimensionals, this concept of creating 3-dimensional spaces with 2 dimensions and vice versa, and as well with Gertrude Goldschmidt.
Yes, who's there on our back wall. We can see a piece of hers in the far back in this image. Yeah, no, it's just, I don't know if Jose has anything else to say, but it's a wonderful piece. Again, it's in a dark room by itself, which is why we don't have a good photograph of it here. It's a series of, I believe it's wires dealt with as.
It's really just gold threads that aren't really gold, that are woven. She wanted it to seem like an spider's web, and it's a play on words that mean web and something delicate or beautiful. This idea of the fragility, but the strength of the spider's web, and that you come across it and it becomes visible and invisible at the same, in interacting with the viewer.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And one of the things that I like about the show so much, and it goes for obviously the work of our 2 artists here, is that, you know, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool formalist at the end of the day, but I like jokes. And the show has, for somebody like me, it's got so many beautiful objects in the show. I mean, there's so many things to kind of, even when you're laughing or when you're crying, to think about how they're made, how they're put together, what they feel like, and how they look. And to me, that is really one of the most exciting things that you can have in a kind of artistic experience. I don't want a thesis. I don't want a lecture. I'm not interested in a school marm rapping me across the knuckles. I don't need that. But these kinds of works, and one of the things that so impressed me about the show is just that it's kind of an old school commitment to objects that will speak to you on multiple levels. And I thought that was wonderful. And Gego was not Gego, but the Ligia Papa was a perfect kind of exemplar of that from an earlier idiom, let's say, since she was an artist from, when did she make that, in the 60s or 70s maybe?
She started them in 78. That one was
78, okay.
91.
I like this spirit of talking about a piece that you cannot see, so you can all go there to see it. So that is just building suspense and building desire for you guys to go and watch it. And in order to be able to, as Lyle said, cry or laugh, you know, the idea is to cry out of laughter, you know, I mean, to some degree, you know, because, and again, you know, the puppet piece, you know, and all the textiles that we have added into the show as part of the Elsewhere. And as you have heard about Ruben and Hugo, they're all talking about, I mean, all these liminal spaces, like the border is a liminal space. The border in itself, you can see it and not see it at the same time. It's there and not there. And that's why it has all this capacity of mixing all these things. This, I mean, robotlikle, you know, I mean, you have the past and the future connected, you know, on one side, you know, I mean, you have all this, I mean, as I learned, you know, the term from some of Ruben's students, you know, and Ruben's own work, you know, this kind of alienígenista. I mean, it's not only indigenous, but also alien in terms of, like, you know, being not only an illegal alien or an alien, you know, but also being indigenous, you know. I mean, so there's all these things mixed in that part, in that liminal space, in the same way that, you know, the puppet does, you know, you see it and you don't see it at the same time. And in the same way, you know, you have all these interweavings, you know, between, I mean, what we try to do in the show is basically weave ourselves certain pieces, out of thinking about Gego and Gego and puppet together with works of textile artists from some indigenous artists, from Colombia, from Guatemala, from different parts. And again, this all make this big, strange tapestry that again is, to my view, the way that we interact, and the way that we live in the world, especially, I mean, I say in the Americas, in which so many elseworlds are present at the very same time.
And that liminal space is something that really interested Adal too. He talks about a parallel universe being out of focus.
Yeah, exactly.
And his work, really, Coconuts in Space, is quite serious. In the interview of the coconut with the NASA agent, that he also very interested in the environment, which I think a lot of the connection with the cosmos is that connection with the greater environment, that he feels that he lost the reason he went to the moon before NASA, the coconut, was because his island, Puerto Rico, had disappeared underwater. So it's also a real serious commentary, but that idea of the liminal space of the other, and the diaspora, even the word means sort of not here.
Yep. So that's yeah.
Yeah, I have another question that kind of relates to this idea of sort of elsewheres and crossings, and both of our artists have dealt with it's kind of like the 800-pound gorilla in the room if you're going to deal with sort of issues of Mexican art and culture. And that is, both of you have dealt with with the mural tradition in Mexico, both with its political implications and its very public kind of iconography. And you've dealt with it in really quite different ways. I wanted to start out, and if we have enough time to talk about this, I wanted to talk first to Hugo about your, we have a picture of your Cuenca mural, and it kind of stands in some ways with the way you work. I wonder if you could talk about trying to come to grips with, with Siqueiros and with Orozco and obviously, that whole tradition, and how that works for you, how you, again, this takes place in Ecuador. This is in Cuenca, I believe. And I wonder if you'd talk about sort of your relationship to that tradition, because you're working in ways, I think, that recall that constantly, your commitment to drawing, and again, projects like this, which are kind of wall drawings.
Well, I try to avoid it as much as I could, throughout my life. I was desperate to avoid muralism. The fact was that I was living in New York and I never had enough work. So then the way to circumvent that was to draw directly on the wall, and that would fill up a space. So then, I could have a show with small drawings, but then you have this impressive drawing on a wall. So again, like working inside the box, like the creativity of the necessity of things that have to happen. And because even there with those murals, because they weren't commissioned or they weren't planned, they were just improvised on the space. It had this performative aspect to it. I would go to the gallery, I would wear this shirt that said Hugo Rótulos, I'm a sign painter. I'm not the artist, I'm the sign painter that was hired to do this. And that would help me go into a space, and people would come in and they would just see me improvise this drawing on the wall. And because nothing was planned, it was always also done with this idea that at the end it would be erased. So then I would have 2 weeks of creating the image, and then at the very end of the show, I would come back and paint white squares and kind of pixelate the whole mural out of existence. So then what you're seeing here is this performance of In Memoriam in Cuenca. I went to this park, Parque de la Madre, for the Cuenca Biennial, curated by Dan Cameron, and I started on one side of the wall and just started improvising this mural. From people that would come close to me, they would talk to me because they thought I was not an artist, but a worker. And they would tell me, ¿cuánto te están pagando para hacer esto? How much are they paying you to do this? And I was like, I'm not getting
how much are they?
Yeah, how much did they pay you?
How much do they pay you?
Well, they just paid me with the honor of being there at the park, painting this. So then it was for the art, for the love of art's sake, So then, but this conversation that happened with the public was wonderful. It was part of this performance, And then also their stories started, getting into the mural itself. No, I remember at this point, I was drawing this idea of, again, the robot, no, of this technology that will save us. But then also they were telling me, oh, have you seen the Santo Niño that's in the market? No, and they were telling me about the Santo Niño, who is miraculous and all this. So then I decided, well, I'm going to integrate this idea of Catholicism and the robot and technology, and it's just this very organic process of just me creating an image in conversation with the public. No? But then, of course, at the very end, I would destroy the mural. Well, not destroy it, just paint over it with these white squares. No. And this wonderful conversation would happen because, you know, I'm a self-taught artist. So then I don't really know how a mural is constructed. Usually when you see Diego Rivera, or they have this preparatory sketch and they do this cuadriculado, no, this grid, and then they pass this grid to the huge wall. No? When I was deconstructing the mural, people would thought that I was creating the mural because they would see this grid, no, these white squares that are appearing in the piece, no. And you said, "My God, you're creating this mural," and I said, "No, I'm actually deconstructing the mural by doing this grid," which was something also really wonderful in terms of just getting away from this idea of muralism, but this idea of poetry on the wall itself, no, because you can really you can't really deconstruct a mural. You construct a mural or you destroy it, no? Yes. But this idea of deconstruction is something that's used in poetry, where they would isolate words in a poem to study its meaning. So then this term of deconstructing a poem was something that I kind of placed in this mural aspect, where I would, by painting these white squares, I would isolate these elements in the narrative. And it would become kind of this abstract piece where it no longer makes any sense in terms of the original fluidity of the narrative that was happening in the beginning. So then they had all these aspects of me storytelling by poetry, by visual poetry on a wall, and then the silence that would come at the end, where it would be this white that covers up the mural. So then to me, it was this idea of moving away from muralism with this aspect of, oh, a mural is going to be here forever, and just placing it as this performance. No, I as an actor perform this mural, and then a silence takes over this white. No.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and I mean it's appropriate because we have another artist here who also deconstructed a mural, and Ruben, I wonder if you talk a little bit about America Blanqueada.
Well, I mean,
we have a slide of that. I think I added that, so we do have a slide of that somewhere. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting to hear Hugo talking about this mural that is not meant to be permanent, and that, you know, how it becomes this abstraction, and how he also didn't want to be associated with the muralist. And I also have a question for him that has to do with muralism, but I'll do it afterwards. First, I'll respond to you. Well, I mean, it's not the first mural that was conceived to eventually not last. David Alfaro Siqueiros, when he came to Los Angeles and made arguably the first, one of the first major modern art pieces in the city in 1932, he was hired to make this mural in Olvera Street, which was going to become this kind of I suppose, like this thematic park, or like kind of, you know, this Mexican pueblo for the tourists to buy and consume curious, right, souvenirs. And so Siqueiros created, originally, presented that he was going to create this kind of a rainforest with these Mayan ruins. But then, and they accepted it. They thought it was a great idea. But the day before he opened the mural, he called people from the LA Times and then created this action where he painted this crucified Native American guy with a bald eagle on top, right? So, you know, and it appeared, the photograph appeared in the LA Times, and this action, right, I guess for the time went viral in the sense that it was published in the newspaper and everybody talked about it. And before Diego Rivera had his mural censored in Rockefeller Center, right, he had this one whitewash, right? I mean, they painted it white. But he knew it was going to happen. It was a provocation. In a way, it was like this kind of Banksy intervention.
Yes, absolutely.
That was mediatic. Which for me is very interesting because they always talk, they criticize. I grew up with everybody criticizing the muralists as these Marxist, Lukácsian, social realists. But I think here he was actually more like paying attention to the School of Frankfurt, paying attention to Adorno and Walter Benjamin, because he knew that the media, the mural was going to exist in the media. It was going to be photographed, and then also he was creating what I would call the first monochrome minimalist painting in Los Angeles, at least, if not the world, because he knew that this was going to become this big white thing. So I made this piece that actually uses chromalucent paint. So depending, and it's what like our guys they use this technique to paint ghost flames, which again is like with pearlescence. You paint these flames that you can just see when the light hits the car in a certain way. And so here, when you move around, depending on your point of view, you can see the image of the mural underneath or not. It's like this ghost that this might be seen as a white monochrome, very seductive, beautiful, sleek, shiny, fetish finish, monochrome painting, or somewhere there's this political mural that is telling you this tragic story about native colonialism. Yeah.
Right. The image itself is based on the photograph, correct? Of the mural. Right. Okay.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It is of the mural. Yeah. By the way, there's a version of it right now in New York. If you guys want to see, it's a small version. It's in Rockefeller Center actually. In a show there, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's called Intervention, Interaction, or something. I don't remember, but it's in Rockefeller Center.
Yeah, but I love the idea of a thing that disappears, but it's kind of being replaced by this kind of opalescent surface. This thing that's almost purely aesthetic, and it makes the iconography kind of recede. Even though it recalls that,
or appears, it's like a ghost.
Yeah, like a ghost, exactly.
It's like a ghost there. Yeah. But by the way, it's very compelling to me, at least, to see how the mural was had been restored, and for a city that claims that it doesn't have a history, all of a sudden to have, all these workers in downtown Los Angeles doing restoration. Reminds me a lot of Mexico City, where everywhere you are, there's always these workers finding a discovery, some archaeological site. And so I think Siqueiros finally achieved the condition, those Mayan ruins that he wanted to paint. Eventually he created a Mayan ruin that now it's been valued as a ruin.
Well, the other reference you're making here, that idea of digging up all this stuff where, what you're finding is kind of evidence of day-to-day activity, especially in Mexico City. I think about this, that the piece that you did called The Land Belongs to Those Who Work It. And we don't think of Mexico City as being a place like that, but the more things that we dig up in Mexico City, we find that it is a place that actually does belong to the people who used to work it 5 centuries ago or 10 centuries ago. It's not a bad place for us to go to the Q&A, because I know Ruben has to leave in another half hour or so. And I thought it would be great. Ruben, you said you had a question for Hugo. I
do. And Hugo, my question has to do with this, and it has to do with muralism. One of the things that I found very compelling about Robotlique, if that's its name, is that probably my favorite mural is Diego Rivera's mural in Detroit, the Detroit Art Institute, which, by the way, I think is his only real Marxist mural, in the sense that he really portrays capitalism, right? And how there's this factory and the workers are producing the cars, and then there's this machine that makes the cars, and the machine is Cuatlique. It's a robot.
Exactly.
It's this beautiful thing. And now that you go to to Detroit, and the factories are being closed, and you just have robots substituting the workers. Robotic actually came to life, and I don't know if you talked about it when you did this thing, or if you know about it. If you didn't, you should look up the mural because it's amazing. It's really this sci-fi amazing thing that Rivera conceived. But that's what I wanted to either ask you if there's a relation, or if not, to comment. Yeah.
Well, yes, I'm aware of that mural in Detroit, and I find it beautiful. Yes, yes. But I love this idea of this functioning robot that has this domestic quality to it. You know? Like Robbie the robot being this thing that's there to do our work, to do our menial work. You know? And then also the circumstance that Coatlicue itself had this domesticity to her. You know? Like this idea that she was sweeping the temple, she was cleaning the temple. You know? And also this notion of the working class woman, no? In Mexico City, it's the maid that raises the children. No? So then in this image that I made of Robotlique is she taking these domestic responsibilities of taking care of the children, you know? But then also there's this double-edged sword, no? That's something that will take care of us, will substitute us. It will, you know, we'll get rid of the workers because it will do the work for us, no? So then I wanted to play with all these elements, no, in terms of Robotlique as this mother that takes care of us, but then may be overprotecting us or might take care of us too much, you know, to our detriment.
That's great. Thank you. It's just wonderful to have you guys to have you all in conversation. We probably have a lot of questions from the chat. Chloe, I'm not sure what's there. I haven't followed it, but you probably have a pretty good idea.
We have one question from our friend GE, who I'm going to unmute so that you can ask your question.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And thank you, Lyle and panel. Thank you so much. In terms of approaching, I'm changing my question a tiny little bit. In terms of approaching the making of the murals, is it as much deeper ritual as much as it may be theater?
Well, in my case, I did want to make theater because it was this element where I wasn't supposed to do a mural. They weren't paying me to do the mural. It was just the necessity of a show that, well, I don't have enough work, so then I'll do a mural. So then, yes, so then for me, since the beginning, my intention was not to create a mural, but to do this theater of mural. And that's why I came up with this idea of you know, the Rótulo shirt and not being the artist, but a character, you know, that creates these pieces. So yes, and like I mentioned earlier, like my idea was to move away. I didn't want to do muralism, no, because there was this huge connection of, oh, you're a Mexican artist, you do murals, and I didn't. But in the end, lack of work, you know, and the necessities of a show forced me to be a muralist. Yeah.
I just would like to mention that I'm not a muralist neither, but I also happen to be confused with being a Mexican artist. In a situation that was actually really crazy because it was in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I ended up having to do a mural for the IRA. It's a very complicated story. It will take us another hour to explain. But yes, it was the same kind of situation. You know, I'm like, not all Mexican artists are muralists, sorry. But then there was all this diplomatic incident, and you better do it because there's going to be a lot of trouble. And I ended up doing it, and at the end, I guess it's also, as you mentioned, probably it was more like a theater gesture because it was really a performance.
Right.
I also didn't have much of a say in terms of the content. It was very complicated. It was crazy.
The colors of the flag are more or less the same. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of common stories. I mean, at the end. Yeah, it was.
The Patricios, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have a question about the titles for both Ruben and Hugo. How do titles play in your series, and how do you think about the titles?
Hugo, you want to go, or should I? You want me to answer first?
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, well, I mean, I love titles. I love titling things, especially because of the confusion of the translations. I don't translate. I have a title in English and I have a title in Spanish usually. or they are mistranslations, or they relate to each other, you always miss part of the piece, depending on which language you approach the piece from. Of course, if you are bilingual, then you might get something else. So I really enjoyed that part. And often the titles have this other layer of meaning. I mean, I guess Jose knows because we've played with these things. I mean, it's something that I do enjoy, and I do enjoy the mistranslation, actually. I love this idea that you just can't translate things.
For me, it's the contrary. I hate titling my work because my first motivation to do anything that I do is drawing, like doing a beautiful drawing, and I don't plan anything in advance. So then I just start drawing, and it's just the way I taught myself how to draw was by creating details and then stringing these details together. You know, like I mentioned with the murals, you know, I feel more of akin to a poet. You know, that's stringing together words and that way creating a narrative. The way I taught myself to draw was that way, by drawing a perfectly good eye, you know, and then the other eye, and then the face, and compose a face, and then from there creating a narrative, you know, through the process organically of drawing on a white page, you know. So then at the end, it's just me struggling to come up with what did I do, you know, because people require a title, people require for this drawing to be called something, and I feel that, well, my eloquence is in the drawing, not in my words. So the title is, I always suffer with the titles, you know, at the very end, try to come up with something that will kind of, you know, I don't know, synthesize what I did in the drawing, which is, if it's something that I did for months, it's 9 months of narrative, done in this drawing, how can I put it in a word? It's ridiculous to me, So yeah, so it's titling to me is the part I struggle the most as an artist.
I have another question I have a question specifically for Ruben. I wonder if we could bring up that image of the one that I added, which is the Olmec head in Maya land. Okay, it's a photograph I brought in. You know where that is in the group?
Yes.
Yeah, there it is. So this is one of my favorite pictures of all time. Ruben, I wanted to talk to you about photography. You made some interesting comments about photography earlier on. And as somebody who writes a lot about photography, I'm interested in the application of a term that one of the critics who wrote about your work, I can't remember which one it was, Huetmac Medina, maybe, and he described it as mutually assured distortion. And I'm thinking about your use of photography as a kind of deadpan medium, appropriating other people's pictures or even taking your own. And this idea that maybe photography is pretty much as kind of as wild a medium as we really need, even when we play it straight. Here's a perfect example. That the world gives us material, we don't really have to do much with it. We just have to make a picture of it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you a lot. I would add to that I really love probably my favorite art in the world. One of my favorite art pieces in the world are actually the graphic work of Goya, right? I mean, I think his graphic work is amazing, right? Yeah. It's this crazy thing, and it's personal, and it's expressive, and it's critical, and it is political, and it has everything. But it's very personal. That's not the job that he was doing for a living, right? I mean, he has to do tapestries, and so the drawing and making these etchings was a kind of personal thing, and obviously the caprichos. I mean, this series of pieces of him, they're very fantastic. They are very crazy, they're very well, the disasters of war, he talks about them as if he would be talking about photography, like, he claims that he was there, although apparently he wasn't, and that he saw these things, which he didn't, but he confers these kind of like indexical quality to them. This is the truth, I saw it, that's what they're valued. And for me, the weird thing is that I often find photography doing that work for me. But as you pointed out, it sees it's there. like I've tried to be Goy. I've tried to create my fantastic world with these metaphors and critiques and commentaries, dramas. But they're not as effective as what I found that already exists. I just need to get out to the street and walk enough to find something way crazier than what I thought. And certainly that happens in the places certainly that happens in California, that happens in Latin America, that happens around the border. These are places where the reality is wilder than my imagination, but because of the quality of the way you work with the medium is very immediate, it's very personal. I shoot it, I edit in my computer. I don't know, it has this thing. So yes, I mean, I don't know what. Yes, reality is stranger than fiction. I tried doing at some point constructed photography because I want to be a contemporary artist, and then I thought that just being was
right,
and way better. Yeah,
right. You retreat in the face of reality and say, you can't make this stuff up. But we do.
Yeah,
we do.
Hugo, you also are an admirer of Goya, no?
Yes, very much. That's why I'm very happy to hear Ruben mention Carlos Caprichos, no? Because actually my series Tijuanerias is my interpretation of recreating the Caprichos de Goya, but in this case, instead of it being 17th century Spain, or 18th century Spain, it's Tijuana, Tijuana, and creating this kind of magic, this notion of this place of La Leyenda Negra, playing with La Leyenda Negra. These are the drawings of the Tijuanerias, which are my interpretation of the Caprichos. So this playing like with the idiosyncrasies of Tijuana, but adding this element of fantasy and witchcraft and also issues of the border. Like with this instance, you don't know if it's an abduction or if they're playing or if it's a game. Jugando la piñata.
Exactly.
It has these elements of dangers, but then also has these elements of crime, a crime that's being committed. Or here, the narco violence, but it's the woman that's carrying the AK-47, and but this life of, you're supposed to die as a narco, like the same thing that they said about a bullfighter, Any bullfighter that lives past his 30s is a coward because he was supposed to die in the ring. And it's the same notion of the narco valiente, that, you're supposed to die in battle, So then all these elements that I started playing with the Tijuanerias that kind of reference this magic of Goya's Caprichos, but with me just placing it in the city of Tijuana, which I find it's like this very surreal place also.
And they do remind documentary photography because of the black and white.
Absolutely.
There's a level of realism.
Yes. And then you were talking about the immediacy of photography. With this case, these are actual drawings from my sketchbook. Like this was a sketchbook where I was creating all this imagery. And then in the end, it became the series of Tijuanerias. But like you mentioned, it's the immediacy of the drawing and the immediacy of something that's done in person. And also this element of truth. I can say I was there and pretend that I saw this. Yes, un taco stand being eaten by this monster. I was there. I saw it.
It's great.
So Lyle, do you have any last questions before we turn it over to our poet today?
No, listen, I have many more questions, but I think this is a really good place to end it, actually. Reference to Caprichos.
Thank you.
So with that, at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Angela Vasquez, to the stage. Poet, writer, performer, and activist Angie Trudell Vasquez is the current City of Madison Poet Laureate. She's received her MFA in poetry from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to read from my new collection, My People Redux. And while I was listening to you all, I changed my set a couple times. So, but it was such an interesting conversation, and I love what you're doing. So this is called My People Redux. 1. Crossed rivers and high deserts before water jugs littered parched lands, rode motorbikes, carried comals, seeds, black and white photographs. fought poor villagers on their homelands, went from high school to the front lines. Lessons on patriotism led to flag burning, joint slit, alcoholic stupors, streaking, a roll of the dice, heads I live, tails I leave. My people forgot they rose from the earth. 2. Our great grandpa knew he planted corn rows, praying while he weeded and walked between his crooked lines, singing to the clouds to come lay their rain music down, drum a new rhythm, tap the green stalks to grow. He wove a footpath from the back door to the smallest plant, whispering its name, and fed his family with what he wrought from earth and aqua sky, what he coaxed between loam and hard copper hands. 3. His kind fingers twist off pears, peppers, slender green beans, husks of sweet corn, crab apples and peaches, what the white-tailed deer did not nibble. Bees buzz in their hive, lured by the burnt man who croons at dawn, by his wife who brings him pan dulce and black cream in the morning in her pink house dress and potato sack apron. Leather patched by sun in scarecrow clothes, muscles cling to his bones, never young. Family, a heavy wool blanket covers his sins in the heat. Blessed with grandchildren, they run in his rows, bring him home books he cannot read, pages telling a history he corrects after cartoons each day. 4. Great-grandchildren search for his buried grave, armed with spades and hoes, so they know where they came from and can find their way back to the original place of green grace, mountain breath, stews cooked with seeds woven into a young girl's black braid sewn in the hem of her deer dress. That is My People Redux. I'm going to read this poem after Lorca. But first I'm going to read May's Maiden. After Rexley Jim, wait, chica, listen. Press knees, lips, ears to earth floor. Corn in the beginning, corn in the end. Green arms dance in rows, ancestor whispers shed pollen in wind. Years of plenty, stories fill bowls, children grow long. Tomorrow's seeds, rest endures. And I want to read a couple of more mystical poems. This is called Fragments in Time. Moonlight radiates down, children do not mourn. Parents buy new shoes. Rabbits copulate in grass, leap over each other and dash. Cracking open a woman, a child bursts itself. Bodies arc over steering wheel, fog condenses glass. We find each other. A voice in my head says, he is the one. After the fall, people see they are not who they thought. Fortify hope in a wooden barrel, send her over water to live in her grandparents' stable, wait out the peril. Dust storms, train tracks pounding down her back, nails piercing flesh, hand rotting still attached. Shoulder-length hair, khaki crescendo, camel jacket wind sails, ghost bodies hang around invisible ankles, gray cement. He follows me, shouts from corners, beware, beware. Grandson places hand in sandpaper fold, parachutes to shoulders, peers down fields where white herons alight, flocks migrate, nest at feet of skyscrapers, exhaust fumes, birch oasis. Moonbeams flood evening, babies born with wings flee fire steeples, plant pine forest temples, along the shores of ancient rivers start over. What was our first language? Poets resist death of a people, fingertips bless pen, paper, full moon halo crowns campus, new humans born, two hearts beating, sound. That's Fragments in Time from my collection, In Light, Always Light. This is how I live my life, in light, always light. And that's the name of this third collection. In light, always light. Grass strands gleam, weave, undulate from the window. The vendor screams, build the wall. Looks, his hand looks at me, works the crowd, sells more t-shirts. My mind waxes brilliant wet glass wings, waves shine back my reflection. I am dazzled by the sun glinting off my cat's whiskers. He lays on his back, flanks flayed by the deck, half shade, half light. First graders play football on marigold carpet in our shared backyard. The smile on their faces when they catch it warms us, childless apartment dwellers behind glass walls. The poet reads a book of poems, then walks to the park to think. She does not know what she is going to do, hike the sled hill or swing on the swing. If no children are present, she will swing until her stomach says no, then descend from her height among the treetops and head home. She circles the preserve, full of earth thoughts, falling leaf music, crashing, crushing sounds, and auburn smells float up from her footsteps. She thinks. We spin on Earth's axis, half blinks of history. And if it's okay, I'm going to read a brand new one that's in the Yellow Medicine Review, which is my favorite journal these days. And this is a love poem for my husband called How to Write Absence. How to Write Absence. A hollow cobalt vase, a bottle universe, dirges sung at your funeral, chiseled gravestone markers, one plate at supper, rugged wheelbarrows still, purple iris bloom short, violet carpets cry out for your footsteps. Silent moth wings drink at night from the bird bath, take turns with the bees, fireflies, crickets sing, ants plow tunnels underneath, worms creep, churn dirt in their wake. Tonight we forget our worries, spoon, sleep sound, kick off blankets, tug sheets. Cold at night, we lack insulation from the deep freeze. The earth hums, hello, goodbye, gracias, go to sleep. Agile light streams bend the glass. Gold orange dream halos circle the bamboo floor you laid. New homeowner with fresh knees, broad back, we wax for years with bare toes, feet, padded slipper soles, pet dander. Filio dust fills the cracks. Now you stir, make coffee, feed the mew cats. I cry 5 minutes max, anticipate your absence. No smooth torso flesh at dawn. Write the scene where you come back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you, Lyle, Estrellita, Jose, Hugo, and Ruben. We also would like to thank Alejandra and the team at Another Space for helping make today's event possible. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. Join us Monday at 1 p.m. for a conversation, The Shape of Ideas, Sean Scully, featuring our very own Fong H. Bowie with David Carrier, Robert C. Morgan, Rafi Sarkissian, and Amanda Srokat on the event of the exhibition of the same name on view at the Philadelphia Museum of Art through the end of July. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Graham Faust. You can now turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you leave, and until we see you again in the new social environment.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Gracias a todos.
Thank you.
You're great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
That was amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Lyle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fong.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Hi, Don.
I'm sorry I was in a meeting, so I missed most of it, but I will re-listen to it tomorrow.
Thank you.
Always
tomorrow.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thanks for
Thank
being
you so much.
Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the reading also.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angie.
Lyle,
Thank you, Angie.
Thanks, Fong.
yeah,
Thank you,
keep on the
Lyle.
board, please.
Thank you all.
Have a great weekend also.
So,
Cheers.
thank you. Have a good day.
Love and courage.
Thank you. Have a good
Bye.
weekend.
Bye.
Good
Bye-bye.
weekend.
Oh.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Time. Bye.